That music is such a pump up, you know? It's like, we should dance.
Are you ready for some real talk?
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
So guys, I assume many of you in the audience are maybe more early stage. So your dream is to get in front of Mood later, more at the growth stage of VC. But Mood, I thought it'd be interesting to start with what do you see as sort of the efficiency of the VC market today? Is there too much money out there for startups? Is it hard for these guys to make it all the way to you? What do you see?
Yes, there's definitely too much money in the market, and you could say that favors innovation and startups because there's access to capital. But I think that's like an inverted way to look at the formula of success in terms of what it takes to make a startup really thrive, because capital is just one step along the journey. And when there's too much of it out there, what happens is there's just so much pollution in the environment in terms of things that can be competitive, businesses that shouldn't succeed, that are continuing to pollute the market in terms of what offerings they're giving to consumers, that may have really no unit economics behind them. And then you could have the right model, the right innovation, but because someone else is better financed or 10 other people are better financed, you get sort of lost in that shuffle. And so I think in that respect, companies that are bootstrapped, industries, subcategories where there isn't a flood of influx of money, I think innovation succeeds better with the disciplines of bootstrapping or with the disciplines of a little bit of capital scarcity that we're not seeing today. You know, the metaphor I always use is it's like raising a child. The spoiled ones don't end up turning out really great. It's the ones that you're more disciplined about, how they spend their money, what they're spending their money on, that end up growing up to really thrive as adults.
Well, one thing I wonder is, you're based in Silicon Valley, I'm based in New York, we're here in Lisbon. How much is the old sort of model that the money is highly concentrated on literally one road in Menlo Park near Stanford? How much is that true, or do you think that it's become easier for maybe some of our friends in the audience from, let's say, other parts of Europe to get that good quality money?
Yeah, look, I think that's a very timely topic because this isn't the era of 10 years ago or even 5 years ago where you had to be in Silicon Valley to have the proximity to the talent, where you had to build, as a startup, the entire tech stack from the ground up. Now in the world of AWS, in the world of the App Store, in the world of Facebook, you can sort of build the tech stack and get distribution even though you're far outside of Silicon Valley. And I think the tech talent is also increasingly moved away from Silicon Valley as well. Big tech giants like Google have established engineering globally. And so you can tap into those engineering resources to develop companies in areas that are outside of Silicon Valley. For myself and my own investing experience, 6 of my last 7 companies have been outside of Silicon Valley.
Wow.
So I spend a lot of time in Europe. I have an investment in Berlin called Go Euro. I spend a lot of time in New York and in LA, and I think increasingly you're going to see the proliferation of talent in those markets. The final thing I'll say is, I think there's a difficulty when you're growing up in Silicon Valley and trying to test your product in Silicon Valley to use that as the right test market. People in Silicon Valley are not really normal. The socioeconomic profile of that market is not ordinary, it's not mass market. And so to say, hey, my product works in Silicon Valley, it can therefore proliferate globally, it's much better to test those products in a place like New York and a place like London.
So does that mean Silicon Valley is sick or off kilter? Does it need to course correct in some way, or what should we take away from that?
No, I mean, I think no city is going to have a monopoly on innovation. And so I think it's not a matter of Silicon Valley has lost its edge. It's a matter of innovation exists globally. And at one point, Silicon Valley had access to the resources that allowed innovation to sort of catapult itself, capital, the technology companies, access to talent. Those things are now increasingly scattered, and I think that's great for innovation broadly.
So at the later stage, some of the other investors that you might see are not in Silicon Valley. They're coming from sovereign wealth funds these days. They're coming more from even public investors. And then I think the one that I've heard a lot over the last couple of days, SoftBank, with that massive, eventually 100 billion or much larger fund. What do those giant funds that maybe aren't even looking for short-term returns, what do they mean down the ecosystem for startups or for you guys?
Certainly, on the one hand, it's an influx of a ton of capital. And the pollutive effect of capital, I think, in part, happens with anyone who has those types of resources and that type of mandate to enter the market. I think on the plus side, when you have businesses that are doing well and happen to be burning a lot of cash, particularly businesses in the on-demand space, these on-demand marketplace businesses, a lot of times capital can be the difference maker in them surviving or not. A lot of the real iconic, durable companies, they figured out a formula that worked, but they were not managing towards short-term cash flows. And so even Amazon in its early days. And so those kinds of businesses, commerce platforms, on-demand marketplaces, ones that are looking to scale on a global level once they figured out the formula locally, I think a large provider of capital like a SoftBank can be instrumental and formative in their success in ways that without them, it would be much, much harder. However, in general, I think there's too much capital in the market, and I think if there isn't proper discretion on where that capital is going, in general, it's going to have a pollutive effect for everyone in the ecosystem.
Now, when we think about sort of good money, does it matter where the money started to you? Like, Kleiner Perkins and the biggest VC firms typically get their money from nonprofits, from big sort of institutions that are sort of very clearly above board. But then when you have newer funds or these sort of special funds rising up, the money can come from states like Saudi Arabia or from unknown sources. If I'm an entrepreneur, should I want to follow the money and ask a potential investor where they got their money from, or do you think that doesn't matter?
I think it's critical. I think it's really important. And one of the hallmarks of an institution's level of quality, its longevity, its history, are the depth of the high quality relationships that it's preserved over time. So in a pure economic sense, you want sources of capital that are going to have longevity. So when you look at our sources of capital, for example, we've been around 5 decades. These are the Harvards, the Princetons, the Yales that are going to be there through good times and bad. And what that means is we don't have to live fund to fund. If we have, during one cycle, something that's suboptimal performance, we're not worried about our ability to raise capital in the next fund cycle. Of course, we care about the delivery of returns to our LPs. Of course, we care about being an outstanding performer in each vintage. But the point is that our capital base doesn't live and die year to year. And so from a longevity perspective, it matters. But I think what you're after is sort of the quality of their interests or how they might be aligned politically.
Well, people sometimes say that you kind of vote with your dollars, right? And that who you do business with is a moral or political decision as well. It's not just abstract money that doesn't have a face attached to it, doesn't come from anywhere. So I am thinking, especially since a lot of these guys might be raising money from investors before they would get to you, would you evaluate them based on who's invested in them before? The morals that of the people that are their business partners. Like, does that impact an investment decision?
Our selection of limited partners is similar to an entrepreneur's selection of their venture capitalist. And so what their motivations are, what their track record is, you ultimately answer to them. And so even though there's the abstraction layer of I've got an institution that invested in me, who cares about who put money in them, the reality is those institutions answer to those limited partners. And those limited partners have motives, they have an agenda. And if you're misaligned with that, then you're not making the right business decision. And so they're going to be aligned with the interests of their LPs. And so there's going to be a trickle-down effect to that in terms of how that flows through to you. So yes, I think it is really important. And despite the fact that many institutions try to obfuscate that, it ultimately will bleed through.
So we've also seen, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Moneyball. There was the movie with Brad Pitt, and it was a bestseller in the US, about analytics coming to sports and sort of people picking teams from data. We've started to see that now with startup investing as well. with funds that are saying we're going to use algorithms to surface up the highest growth companies. We don't even need to meet face-to-face before we make an investment. How much are you data-driven? How much do you think there is room for going with your gut or sort of liking a founder's person to make a big check?
Well, I think you can automate journalism quicker than you can automate investing, in my opinion. So if either of us is going to get automated away, I think your industry might be more likely. But in all seriousness, I think, look, bringing data to your decisions, it's critical. And we use, over time, I've been doing this 15 years, and I'm in awe of how much data and technology we've brought into the process of recognizing great businesses out there through the signals of adoption, how users are gravitating towards things in terms of their usage data, download data, what's being talked about, which now is a measurable task rather than something you're reading. But to then take that, ingest that, and to apply some algorithm in terms of the selection process, I think that's a little irresponsible, because I think at the heart of it, we're a people industry. And so particularly in the formative phases in the life cycle of a company, you really need to understand the makeup of the founder, the clarity of their product vision, where it's headed, what the sand traps might be, how they respond to sort of the ebbs and flows of what's happening. And if you're not doing that on a human level, you're not connecting your pattern recognition of the history that you've had in working with companies through success and failure to understand the risk profile that you're entering. And bringing an algorithm to that, I think, is a disastrous formula. Although I think an algorithmic-based approach to digging through data, I think, is a useful tool for humans to then evaluate in a sort of human one-to-one interaction in terms of assessing the actual investment merits.
So we've got a question coming in from the audience that has a lot of votes, and I kind of like it. I might twist it a tiny bit. There's kind of two that are related. One is sort of when you know you're a VC investment or not, whether you're a small business or a startup that should be raising VC. And similarly, if you sniff that you're onto something big, but you don't think you have the money to necessarily get there, do you raise money? What do? I mean, how do you sort of figure out which track you're on?
Okay, so I think there are two ends of the spectrum here. Number one, I think there's something really to be cherished about the benefits of bootstrapping. The muscles that you develop without raising capital allow you to learn how to invest marketing dollars, ad dollars, R&D efficiently in a way where you don't become bloated and do some of the crazy things that I think overfunded companies do that makes it difficult for them to understand whether their business formula actually works. So that's the argument in the favor of bootstrapping and not raising a lot of capital. The argument in the favor of raising capital is really understanding that you have a finite market window. I've got an innovation where I know there's product market fit, and as soon as I capture that magic of user adoption, I want to scale it. And if I scale it at an ordinary pace in a bootstrapped fashion, I may not be able to get to the critical mass that I need to in a period of time where that market window is there for me, where Amazon or Google or someone else might not attack it. And so in those instances where you have it figured out and it's time to really attack that market window with authority, I think putting capital dollars into a formula like that, to put venture capital behind that, is a very responsible way to achieve success.
So what if I only want a really small amount of money, and I want to stay profitable, I want to keep a lot of ownership of my company? Is that okay to you?
Sure. I don't think it's a question of ownership. It's a question of, I always say, don't think about your slice of the pie. Think about how big the pie that you're creating together. So, if you don't need capital, I think that's one of the problems of innovating in Silicon Valley. People think entrepreneurship means venture capital. It doesn't. That's the tail wagging the dog. You shouldn't say, oh, I want to start a company. How do I raise venture capital? You should think about the innovation that you want to create, what it takes, and then if capital becomes a limiting factor, what amount do you need to raise in order to get yourself to the next milestone, and then how much capital. It's almost like a stair step of how much you need to get to the next phase. So I think those are the right questions to ask, as opposed to sort of the inverted question that focuses on the capital raise.
Are there sources of money, though, that aren't VC that would be a red flag to you? Like if I took out a small business loan, would I be pegged forever as a small business? Or if I took money from a wealthy individual instead of doing VC, and then later on you see my business?
Look, I think many small businesses in America, that are outside of our bubble of consumer internet or anything like that, that is their formula for success. They take out a small business loan. Now, in our world, in technology, there's a self-selection advantage of having a premier venture capital firm back you. You're a part of an echelon of other firms that they're a part of. You get to network with them. If you have marketing questions, they've seen all of those stories before. They can help you navigate through that. So I do think there is a benefit at your formative stages to have someone who's got the experience to help navigate you through some troubled waters. So I do think it's good to be careful about the quality of money you're taking early on. But look, I don't think innovation and entrepreneurship necessarily requires venture capital.
So I haven't seen this question before. Would you ever do a deal in Africa?
I would. I don't have any problem with Africa as a market. I just don't know a lot about it. And I don't know a ton about China. I mean, China is a market that is intoxicating from an investor's perspective in terms of how explosive it is, the opportunities, the depth of innovation. But if you don't have a lot of experience there, you don't feel like the risk reward is on spec for you. Africa is a market I have no experience in, and so I don't feel like I've got the depth of knowledge where I can add value and where I can effectively assess risk reward.
So if I'm a startup in a place that doesn't feel like a huge hub for capital, like I'm not in Berlin, I'm not in London, I'm not in the US and New York or SF, what do I do to get noticed from a place where the reaction might be that, oh, I don't really know that place?
Well, increasingly global businesses that are testing their product in one market but are designed to proliferate globally. The signals, we talked about the technology and the data that we're mining, we're going to get those signals. And so if there's a company in New Zealand that's blowing up and it's a marketplace business in a category that we know a lot about, but we don't pay that much attention to New Zealand, then the question is, are there peculiarities about that market that made this successful that aren't going to work in other markets globally? Then yes, we wouldn't look there. But first of all, we're going to see those signals, and then if it is something that happened to be created in an off market, but is something that could absolutely port elsewhere, that's something that we would pay attention to. So I would say, don't pay attention to the capital, pay attention to your end users, pay attention to your customers, and then the money will find you.
And if you were to pick between, let's say, revenue, user growth, retention, is there one sort of metric or just like good sign for you that recently, if I'm nailing that thing, I probably have a good business, I'm going to get your attention a little bit more?
The highest quality metric you just mentioned is retention. So growth can be measured on user growth, revenue growth, obviously unit economics that are associated with that. I always say, is there good quality revenue or bad quality revenue? Revenue that creates repeat behavior. Repeat behavior to me is a better measurement of the quality of your product than NPS. I actually think NPS measurement, just as a science, is a faulty science. It's like, I see NPS riddled with full of shit, right? And instead, I look at, well, if your users love it, how often are they using it? So something that they're using daily, that says something about how mission critical that is to their lives. And then the repeat patterns tell you that they're constantly coming back. So if you have those quality measurements that are also attached to growth stats around usage and revenue, then you've got a formula that has longevity.
I want to sneak in one more question because it got so many likes. Let's just do one though. What would be the most important question a young startup should be asking a VC if they track one down in the halls here at Web Summit?
Wow.
What can they learn? Is there anything you can learn from a quick interaction like that, or anything that they should be asking themselves?
I think the quality of the questions that your VC is asking. There are so many cookie cutter questions that venture capital firms can come and ask you. The freshly minted MBA that is going to ask you the questions that are straight out of a textbook. They're wasting your time. These are things that you've thought of. But in the interaction that you have with a venture capitalist, if you learn something from them, I mean, that's really what I aspire to do in the 30 minutes or an hour that I spend with an entrepreneur for the very first time. I'm not going to know enough to know every nook and cranny of their business, but if I can think of what they're doing a little bit differently, offer a fresh perspective, say something provocative, I think that's going to be something that hopefully, in terms of the relationship that evolves, is going to be additive. And I would say on the flip side, for entrepreneurs that are meeting venture capitalists, look for that magic, something that's different, a perspective that's, that's not out of the box or cookie cutter, because that's going to be really a source of competitive advantage for you once you have them connected to the hip in the boardroom with you, to really get that depth of knowledge that you wouldn't have found elsewhere.
Well, I'd love to see if they have a hook that pulls us off if we just never stopped, but we should probably get off stage. Thank you, Mood.
Awesome. Great.
Thanks, guys.